All right, everyone, we're going to get started. So thank you so much for joining this month's GovChats webinar. My name is Erica Rowe, and I'm with the Georgia Technology Authority in the Office of Digital Services and Solutions. In our session today, we're going to be discussing the ethical considerations when developing and using AI systems in state governments and in public institutions. But before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items to touch base with you on. If you have questions today, make sure to put those in the Q&A box, please, just so that we have them all in one place, and we want to make sure we don't miss out on any questions that you all have. You can find the QA button in the bottom menu that runs across your screen there. There's a little icon with a question mark. You can put your questions there. Also, at the end of the webinar, we'll be sending out a survey for your feedback. We greatly appreciate it if you wouldn't mind to take a few minutes and respond to it. It helps us out to improve future GovChats with relevant topics and timely information, and just to know a little bit more about what you're interested in hearing and learning about. Now it is my great pleasure to hand it over to one of our speakers today, Nikhil Deshpande. He is Georgia's Chief Digital and AI Officer. Nikhil?
Thank you so much, Erica, and welcome everybody to the September edition of GovChats. It's my pleasure to talk about the topic that we're going to be discussing today and have an excellent speaker join us that I will introduce in a minute. But let me introduce the topic, which is the ethical dimension. As we all can agree that ethics plays such a crucial role in emerging technology, going forward, also existing. We truly understand ethics as a societal conceptual, concept that we have learned so much from, our childhood, but really like the way it affects our day-to-day in helping us guide some of the projects that we develop and also using to innovate going forward, especially in the realm of AI. So as some of these newer technologies advance, it also raises the concerns about privacy, bias, fairness. So by considering the ethics from the start, like how can we ensure that new tech is used responsibly, prioritizing human in the loop, and having as much transparency, right? In the past, where we have seen some of the examples of technology advancing a lot faster than where the ethical framework could actually be put in place at the right time. And then we had to kind of work backwards towards fitting that technology into the ethical framework. So with the advent of AI, since like 2 Novembers ago, we are tackling this topic about like how can we have the ethical framework put in place just in time to be able to roll out some of the future-facing technology in an ethical form. Joining me is Dr. Rose Procter. Dr. Procter serves as the Associate Director for Ethics and Compliance within the Office of Internal Audit, Ethics and Compliance at the University System of Georgia. And she's the Executive Director for the TRUIST Center for Ethical Leadership at the Mike Cottrell College of Business within the University of North Georgia. She leads several key programs aimed at building ethical leaders and enhancing organizational cultures. Rose, welcome to GovChats, and such a pleasure to have you and address this particular topic, which really is on top of most people's minds. And anytime I have conversations across my counterparts in different states or with other state agencies, having the ethical framework, everyone acknowledges that it's very important to have one. A lot of times people are not sure what the starting point is. So my goal in today's conversation is going to really, get a lot of like your experience in the last many years of applying ethical frameworks and how can we not be chasing things that have really kind of like, where we talk the proverbial genie out of the bottle, and how can we be really like proactive in making sure that we roll out some of these future-facing technology, which is so powerful, in an ethical way, in a responsible way. So maybe I would love to just start off by, gaining some insight on the why of ethics, right? Like we all realize that it is important, but if you could walk us maybe through certain steps or certain examples of like the importance of ethics in general, and then maybe we could lead a little more towards like the real importance of having that ethical framework in emerging technologies, specifically like AI, where we totally see what the power of AI is. So, it's more important than ever. So maybe starting out with like, why is it so important, and how can we all learn about it?
Yeah, so first off, thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're having a good day. So when we think about ethics, I think we all think different things, right? We're all coming from very different textbooks. Our textbooks are made up of what we experienced from birth, a very traumatic event that luckily we do not remember or recall, all the way up until, everyone got, on this GovChats call today, everything we've ever experienced, our beliefs, our values, our morals, and just how we've interacted with other, humans, but our environment in general, right? That when you think of ethics, there's definitions that broad, right? And they're all individually defined. And so when we think about why it matters, I think at the heart of it, as you mentioned, everybody kind of has an underlying understanding that a certain set of guiding principles and values matter. Now, those differ depending on what culture you're in, what organization you're in, even public versus private, even the industry that you're in can kind of have a weight on what you prioritize over different types of principles or values. And so I think we can all kind of say, that it matters and that it's important how we treat each other. And it's important how we conduct our behavior or how organizations conduct their business or their operations. I think the challenge comes in to the comment that you made earlier in the sense of, I know it's important, I'm just not exactly sure how to intentionally focus on it or to really have it as a foundation for every decision that we're making. And maybe in the past it wasn't as crucial. So ethics always matters. It matters less and more depending on, how many people are involved, the complexity of the operation, or maybe the decision or choice that's being made. And then the scalability, how many people will that impact? How many stakeholders do you have? So it fluctuates on, the importance and the impact of ethical considerations depending on what you're deciding. I think it's very crucial for us at this time, just as humanity, because we're making decisions about things that just quite frankly, we don't understand. We don't really know what the long-term impacts will be of some of the emerging and advancing technologies that we're working on today. And it kind of reminds me, you said maybe some examples. So we were in this spot about 15, 20 years ago on the cusp of social media and even before that. And, social media was just some people in some chat rooms and people connecting when Facebook first came out. And, now my college students are like, Facebook? Nobody's on Facebook, right? That's like the older generation. And
What's that? Yeah.
yeah, what is that? And they kind of laugh and, talk about Instagram and Twitter and, all these new, Snapchat, all the new kind of social media that they interact with. But at the time, we were making decisions. Maybe intentionally or unintentionally, we were making decisions as organizations. So like a Facebook or what's now known as Meta, or a Google and a Yahoo, but even as organizations, particularly state organizations that, okay, now we're going to have a LinkedIn and we're going to have a Twitter handle and we're going to have a Facebook and an Instagram, and we're going to engage with our citizens in the state through this platform. And I think there can be some really great opportunities and some fun ways of engagement that we couldn't engage before. But there's also ethical considerations, things to think about that maybe we weren't on the front end thinking about. But even on an individual level. So those of us that, were really proactive in that and got out and got, social media, not really understanding maybe some of the implications of that, posting our friends and our families and, social events that we're at, and, all of these types of things, putting it out in that space. And then furthermore, let's talk about those of us that are parents, allowing our children not only to, have access to social media on their tablets or their iPads, or, if they were old enough to already have a cell phone, and, and their computers, and engage in that, but to create their own social media, not really understanding what the scale of that is and who can reach them, and those types of things. So there was a lot of proactive work, right, that we could have done, not just as organizations or entities, but even as individuals, before we kind of just jumped in the ocean of what we now know as social media. And there's been some wonderful things that have happened only because we have that new platform, and we can kind of get information out, and we've seen how rapid that can be, and that can be for better or for worse, right? It can be in a good way to get information out and connect people. It can also be in a bad way. We don't want to go viral, or we've seen people go viral. And it had really long-term implications. I know colleagues personally, colleagues in our region here in North Georgia, that lost their jobs based on what they had posted on social media. I have seen students not get opportunities, right? Particularly our college and high school students not get opportunities based on what they had posted on social media. It's almost like an unofficial resume that now organizations are kind of watching and seeing, what kind of person are you? And they're using that to kind of determine our self, our reputation. So now that we're kind of, we've got that still going on, by the way, we haven't figured all that out. Now studies and researchers are coming out and saying, gosh, we should have done a lot of stuff on the front end, and man, maybe we should have put, that 13 and older, and geez, we should have put these, policies and procedures, or these compliance regulations, or guardrails, as I like to call them, around it. Now that we're advancing that, so it's not just social media, right? We're talking about generative AI, or complex artificial intelligence. We're talking about robotics. And then you're advancing into humanoid robotics and autonomous systems that we're going to be interacting with on a daily basis, as autonomous vehicles and humanoid robotics and things like this kind of emerge. But even on a more simplistic basis, right? Something like ChatGPT. All of this is a little bit more crucial right now just because of the pace. So even, when television, right, a new emerging advancing technology came out, we had almost 60 years to kind of figure out and to see what the long-term impacts and things like that, even up to 75 years before it was, in everybody's households and those types of things, once the technology launched. And the unfortunate truth is the environment that we're in now, it's just really fast paced, Nikhil. And we're not going to be able to go back and have that ability to trial test and to say, ooh, we should course correct. It's kind of going to be out there, and the course correction may or may not be there for us individually, or organizationally, or as a state, or government entity, or even as humankind, right? There's larger conversations of just humanity in general. And so I think it makes it a more crucial time to intentionally focus on it right now. We're at the cusp of it. We're at the early stages. Organizations and individuals leading, like even Sam Altman, right, of OpenAI, talked about, I wish we would have maybe done some things on the front end that we've learned now, even just being out as far as we are out in ChatGPT. Kind of understanding some of those hallucinations and the biases, and the prompts, how people are engaging with it, things like that, was a very rapid. So instead of 60 to 75 years, right, ChatGPT, was at, that many users in 3 months.
Right.
So that timeline is very small. So it's crucial. And then I think on top of that, why it matters is, for this conversation today, most of us are public stewards. Right? This is a government chat. We're talking about being public facing, either inside the government or, a public institution in the state of Georgia or beyond. And whether we like it or not, right, we have a higher level of accountability. We are public stewards, and we represent our citizens. And so it's even more so crucial that we have these intentional conversations. We have ethics at the forefront as we're thinking about this, because to have it reactive could have implications that would mean that we are not being good stewards of the resources that are entrusted to our care as state and government employees to our citizens. And so I think to start the conversation, that's some of the reason of why it matters. Now the challenge is, okay, if we all are on board and it matters, how do we intentionally start those conversations? What types of frameworks can we bring into what areas that are kind of what we like to call high risk areas? So if you know you're going to be purchasing these technologies, then procurement and our purchasing divisions are a high risk area where we want those people to be critically thinking as they bring a new concept or vendor or product into one of our government entities.
Yeah.
So I think that's
Yeah.
where it starts for us of why.
I love the parallel you just mentioned about social media and the need for a certain ethical framework or certain guardrails, because it's, if you think about it, like any product that anyone builds, it's a series of decisions. And I remember back when I was reading some psychology decision making, and they talked about social media up to the point where, like, what was the actual point when it started getting crazy, and that's was identified as when they introduced the like button.
Yeah.
And to make it worse, the initial likes were, I think, anonymous. So you could only see how many people liked your post, but then they actually added more information to it, or like who all has liked your post. So that's really kind of like started influencing decision making of the people creating content for social media. And I feel like I mean the overall decision making just in that context, I don't think people ever envisioned that at some point, some kid may just like choose to end their life because, they are being ostracized or whatever.
Yeah.
People are liking them, people not, um, just paying attention to them. I mean, this is the part where like the societal impact is never thought. People just think of it as a product feature.
Yeah.
And I just really love that parallel for social media, and I feel like we're really just at that point. And you're absolutely right about like us being public stewards, and we have way more responsibility. um, Private sector can, after the fact, come out and say, whoops, we
Yeah.
should have done this.
Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. um, but that's just not the luxury we have. We have to really make sure that any decision making that happens within the public domain is thought out, is making sure it's not leaving anyone out, it is inclusive. It makes sure that anyone and everyone can actually avail that particular decision that we make. What can you think from a, and I feel like this is not something that we normally say, well, the public sector typically catches up with the private sector after a few years.
Yeah.
This is probably not even the same path we are following. So
Yeah.
we really kind of have to blaze our own path in the public sector for making sure that ethical decision making is part of our process. So I would love to kind of, hear your thoughts about, like, what does that journey look like when you talk about having that ethical framework inserted into the initial decision process towards making a product or rolling out a service?
Well, so as you mentioned, right, thinking about all those things, and you were talking about the example we talked about with social media, I think at the heart of it, keeping in mind, right, human behavior. I mean, we serve humans in our state. That's really at the core of it. Whether those humans be individual citizens, whether they be within organizations or companies that are then going to employ and engage and work or serve our citizens in our states. And so human behavior matters, but that's not typically where we start, right? Like you mentioned, a company is talking about their product and the features, and right, we live in a wonderful capitalistic society, but it can be wonderful or really bad if we're not really intentional about some of the ethical considerations and impacts. So I think, when you say like, where do you start and what type of framework does that look like? I think it starts with, as you mentioned, this intentionality of this is really important. And making sure that the tone at the top, right, that buy-in of like, we do want to take a step back and think about it. And to your point, we really don't have a luxury to be reactive. We've really got to be proactive. Because I think in some of this, kind of like in social media, if we're not proactive in those decisions, then our citizens can suffer from that, right? We can have companies come in and use technologies in a way that we feel is more of a targeting or like you were saying, the likes. And I don't think anybody ever, probably on a social media team, ever thought about a child committing suicide based on what was on their social media. I think they thought of it from the positive aspects of they're going to be so engaged, they're going to be able to share pictures and, see family members that they don't get to see all the time and all these types of aspects. But if you guys just take a step back with me and remember high school. I know we've tried to regress those memories, but if something great happens and it's out on social media, then fantastic. You get all this praise and that's wonderful. But if something bad happens or something bad is put out, and it used to be, if you got bullied or if something bad happened to you in the cafeteria, it was really like you and those kids that happened to see it in the cafeteria. Now it's posted and every single person in your school has seen it. And they've seen it because as Nikhil mentioned, it's by name or, you see all of these poems and now they can make comments. And I don't even, if I want to be really, I can make anonymous comments and just have a say about whatever's going on. We weren't probably prepared for that impact of that technology. We've come a long way. I have no doubt there's probably people on this call that know we haven't come far enough. We've got a lot of stuff that's still going on based on social media and our either, where we've gone or where we didn't go and we should have early on. So I think one is that intentionality to understand that it's important. It can have long-term impacts and not just in general, like when we talk about superficialities in the sense of like, well, the citizens of Georgia. I mean, for you and I, right? We live in this state. Our kids go to school here. And if there's anyone in other states, same thing for your states, right? And your governments. These really have, impacts that we feel. And so I think that importance is there. I think the second is intentionality to understand ethics in general. And that comes from knowledge, right? Training. I'm immersed in this all the time. I get the distinct pleasure of critically thinking constantly. I get paid to do it. It's my job and it's fun. At the same time, it's terrifying. Nikhil knows we have conversations about some of the technologies that are starting to touch Georgia, which is our home state. And it's like, well, what does that really look like? Let's start thinking about it through an actual intentional, organized, question thought out kind of code process that takes us through. And you brought up a couple of the concerns, right? So data privacy is a really big one. And I think, going back to our example of social media, I don't think anybody ever really thought in the beginning when they were like, well, I'm posting this picture out that I'm also giving bad people my location or I'm giving, nefarious actors information about me, right? That was never our thought. It is now. And it's starting to become, unfortunately, more so part of our daily lives that we're having to really pay attention to our data. Think of data, and I have to give credit, Chad Hunt, who is the former lead FBI agent here for the Atlanta field office, talked about this in a conversation we had for the University System of Georgia last year with our chancellor. And he talked about data really being a sixth sense, right? As much as we work on our stuff physically, right? So you lock your car and you lock your home and, you protect things that are yours. We're going to have a shift in thought about that the data is an extension of our actual personal and physical being. That's my identity as Rose Procter, and start thinking about our data a little bit differently, particularly with the advancing technologies. So for those of us going back to our example of social media, used to be that you'd post a picture out and those types of things. Well, now I can create an AI generated picture of your family and post it myself. I don't even need you, Nikhil. I just need the pictures that you've uploaded to social media, put it in a generator, say, I want you to create pictures of this family on a vacation at, the Grand Canyon. And I'm going to post this and say, look, Nikhil just got back from the Grand Canyon. And that can be completely false. And you don't even have to be engaged in this, right? I can do this on my own based on what you've put publicly of the images of your family. And so there's some scary aspects of these emerging technologies. And I think in government, we lean on some certain truths. In our compliance areas, like the Office of Inspector General and things like that. It used to be, and I'm a Missouri girl, right? Our whole state motto is the show me state. And now things that you show me may or may not be truthful, right? So images, videos, where will that lead us as far as state entities and our protection and just even for our civilians? So I think training about those frameworks, kind of putting together the big buckets, as I like to call them. So data privacy, data security, are big buckets to be thinking about when we're implementing new technologies, particularly in government or public entities, because we've got to have our citizens and our state stakeholders in mind whenever we're integrating these. And there we've kind of come to about 19 or 20 big buckets. And so Nikhil knows when we think about that training, there's going to be general training. We've got people in our state, Nikhil, that are on very different levels. So some people aren't even sure what artificial intelligence is. Some people look at AI and think of pretty rudimentary systems like a spell check or even Excel, things that you and I probably would not consider artificial intelligence because we're working alongside, large language models, right? LLMs, and we're working alongside companies that are starting to launch humanoid robotics. And we're working alongside organizations or entities that are starting to bring in, large language models, but for their own firms, like Bank of America did years ago. And so even where we're at of what is the level of education around these emerging technologies?
Yeah.
So I think training and education, trying to get us all up on the language, and this is something we didn't do in the social media era. You had different generations. I remember, students coming and talking to me about things, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. I'm gonna have to go Google that. And now it's so fast paced that I think Nikhil and I were talking about some research we're doing in the center. And an amazing ethicist, Dr. Catherine Baird, that's working alongside us in Ethics Game. I think just for higher education professionals that are working on humanities research, there's over 200 different products being offered that integrate artificial intelligence. So just think about that for a moment. That's a very narrow market. It's very small, and there's over 200 products from over 100 different vendors. So it's moving fast of just educating our people about AI and those types of things. I think the next layer is, how do you intentionally put frameworks together so people understand different ethical perspectives in the first place? So there are largely 4 prominent ethical lenses. When we think about ethics, there's a very big structural bucket of like laws and policies and procedures, cultural norms, things to be critically thinking about when we make decisions or implement new programs, particularly public-facing programs. There's an entire different ethical perspective that is all about fairness and justice and equality, and you mentioned bias in our systems and our data. And that kind of has a whole set of questions and conclusions to itself if you're only thinking from that ethical perspective. Then you have consequentialism and utilitarianism. If you haven't thought about these frameworks, you definitely probably know the motto of like, for the greater good. But when you think about decisions from a majority or a democratic view, you have to be critically thinking about questions like, well, what if I'm not in the greater good? Right? What if I'm the minority? What impact does that have? So for instance, in a state organization, maybe we're going to implement a new technology, and it's going to force all of our citizens to go out online and interact with a new platform. Well, what about accessibility issues? What if I don't have access to the internet? I know that for some of us that, live our daily lives, and I know my kids would be like, what? Someone doesn't have access to the internet. In fact, when Irma hit Georgia and we didn't have it for 10 days, my household went a little savage. My kids were like, what do we do? And it was actually fantastic and it was great. And I enjoyed having that disconnect. But we have to think about where our citizens are at, and they are all over the place. You have very advanced citizens and organizations and needs in the state versus maybe citizens that we're working with that don't have access to the internet or to a personal device to be able to access that application for our state, service or whatever we're talking about. But that lens is all about outcome. And so literally thinking about, okay, if we're going to do this, what's the outcome? Who's accessing this system? And then you have what we predominantly think of when we think of ethics. You have a reputation lens of virtue ethics. This is like Aristotle and Plato. These are the characteristics like integrity and honor and respect and questions that align with that of how are you respectful to all your different citizens that have these different accessibility issues. And it's not just maybe I don't have access to the internet. Maybe I have a disability. Maybe I'm blind. And so the way that you're thinking that I'm going to interact with your state agency is completely different than what the reality is like. And so educating folks on that those frameworks exist, but in a simplistic way, like we've just talked through them, and then giving them crucial questions under each of these umbrellas to make them critically think before we make decisions on behalf of the state. So I think training and being able to do that is going to be really crucial, but it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm just looking at some of the questions
Yeah.
coming in, and, Les Thomason from GTA has a question about any specific ethical considerations that are unique or new to AI usage particularly, and can we be confident that general ethical principles already known simply need to be applied now to a new technology? And you did touch upon some of that earlier about like what are some of the existing ethical principles, and we are looking at ethical principles from a AI emerging technology perspective. But like as I was looking through some of the ethical framework that you had talked about in the past, or like where we have seen some of the other organizations roll out, they really all have very much of a framework that is shared across. And you just mentioned accessibility. Um, in GTA in Georgia, we have a very, very robust accessibility initiative for making sure that our overall digital presence is accessible, and we invest a lot of time and effort and budget to make sure that we do constant reviews, audits. So, from a framework perspective, we first had to kind of set some principles, which was again, we want to make sure that first of all, like human dignity was at the core of it.
Yeah.
Whatever you roll out, it is there. Then the stakeholder impact, knowing who is going to be using. Again, you mentioned that. So just to kind of like, I guess answer less in a very specific way, are there any new ethical, I would say vectors maybe that have uncovered?
Yes. So there's a whole bunch. I know we don't have a lot of time today, but Les, thank you for the question. I think one of them that we're kind of grappling with a little bit, you mentioned it earlier about the human in the loop. Well, there's a whole lot of ethical considerations that are coming up just based on that concept of when do you need a human in the loop, and then what human, right? So as we're seeing some of the implementation in some of our organizations like insurance companies, and Nikhil and I have had conversations about the integration of new technologies in our court systems, right? Places where when decisions are made, it has a really big impact on that patient, or that victim, or that defendant, right? In these types of systems. And what's interesting, I think, Les, is it's not probably the ethical considerations that you would think. Some of them are easy, as you mentioned about human dignity and things like that. But even the question of what does it mean to be human? So when we think about human in the loop and we think about the proper, eliminating conflicts of interest. So for instance, for us, we have a process. There's a human in the loop. It's a about medical necessary claims with a client that we're working with, and the human that's in the loop is a physician that then potentially is incentivized to decline claims. So now you've got a conflict of interest, and they can point to it and say, well, we had a human in the loop. Yeah, but what human? What was the motives and what's the governance around those? You really need objectivity when you've got a human in the loop. And so there's a whole plethora of ethical considerations there, but just this concept of even what does it mean to be human. So we've got a lot of new emerging technologies, and I don't know if in your government space you guys are being exposed to these yet, but let me just tell you, in an entity like the University System of Georgia, we are engaging with about a little over 300,000 college students on an annual basis inside the USG. And this is a group that likes to push the envelope, innovation, progress. They're getting out there, and so we've got, companies that are emerging that their whole basis is, they're generating AI for, dead loved ones. And so now you can purchase this AI that's going to interact just like, my mother, right, who's passed away, and I'm going to have that interaction. And there's a whole lot of ethical considerations around that. And us as a organization where the students live and they reside on our campuses, what questions do we have about that? Are we allowing those companies, to market to our college student? There's just a whole lot of questions, but even just about what does it mean to be human? So we had a student come and say, well, I think it's because I can see information. And so then I walked him through, and one of my colleagues, Tamarit, walked him through teachable machine. Well, AI also has a robotic eye, right? They take in information through a robotic eye, just like we're communicating right now. The camera on my laptop is just like our optic nerve, but it's different, right? It's made of different materials. It's not organic versus, hardware. But they have an eye, and then they're like, well, I have a brain. Like, well, they also have a brain. And on teachable machine, I can hold this up and say, this is a water bottle. And I can do, 100 iterations of different images of this water bottle. And then when I hold it up, it's going to say, I think you're a water bottle. I can train it on that. But to Nikhil's point, even using that same example of teachable machine, if I do 100 iterations of this water bottle and only one iteration of this as a cell phone, and I hold up my cell phone, it's going to say, I think you're a water bottle, because I trained it more and I gave it more emphasis in education on a water bottle. And that's where bias comes in. And so just all of these questions are starting to be exacerbated. You talk about, is it specific and unique to AI usage? Yes, because if I had misinformation in my data, maybe it only impacted the University of North Georgia. Now, if I'm putting information and it's out in ChatGPT and so many more people are accessing it, you are basically exasperating those biases, and you're raising more and more ethical concerns and questions. So it is unique to AI just because of the technologies and some of the things that we're facing. And I think it's a challenge because we don't even know the questions to ask. Yeah. For some of us, these technologies are moving so fast, but I think we can narrow it down to some pretty big buckets. And Nikhil, I think that's what we're trying to do in Georgia. So we're starting an initiative, thanks to the leadership of Sean and Nikhil at the Georgia Technology Authority, the ethics DNA. And it's kind of playing on this concept that, to Les, your point, no matter what technology comes, because we have this every so often, right? We transitioned from horse and buggy to an automobile. That was a big deal 100 years ago, and there was a lot of ethical considerations and concerns. Then the Industrial Revolution happened, and then cell phone, computers started to emerge, and then cell phones emerged, and social media, and just each time this kind of happens, we've learned a lot along the way. And we're starting to be able to put that in a simplified way. Not everybody wants to be a PhD level ethicist, and nor can they be. That's unrealistic for your employees and your citizens. But you can make pretty small clips about general ethics, about targeting areas, about, asking crucial questions and not missing, what we're calling kind of code as kind of a foundation, and just saying, gosh, we rolled out this project and I just never really thought about what was next. So that's one of the codes we're working on, in the sense of how can this technology be used in a different way than what you're rolling it out for. You may be rolling it out for this purpose and you're allowing state employees to use it for this specific purpose, but what else will they use it for? And what else will that impact, and what implications will that have, right? So that's one of the genetic codes, is like, a scope, a creep on purpose, and what's next, and to proactively think about that and not reactively be in a situation of like, well, gosh, that's not why we purchased that technology. That's not how the citizens should have been engaging with it. And we've had a lot of those conversations in social media. Gosh, we didn't expect people to go out and search for people in a nefarious way, or for us in North Georgia, we've just recently, luckily, thanks to our wonderful law enforcement, had a 12-year-old girl return to her home in Gainesville, Georgia. And that really all happened through social media. So these are just unintended consequences. So there's just so many things that it can be overwhelming. And I think, Nikhil, that's why we're, as a state in Georgia, trying to narrow it down and say, look, you may not think of everything, but you for sure should have thought of these things about data security and privacy, about accessibility, about human in the loop, about the what's next, all of those types of things. So hopefully that's helpful, just to start the conversation and get us thinking on a proactive state, and hopefully that has answered a little bit of your question. The answer is definitely yes. There's lots of unique things specific to AI.
Thank you. And we have a lot more questions coming in now. So I'm going to slowly go through and sequentially ask certain things that make sense.
Okay.
Well, all of them make sense, but like in the flow of our
few 20
conversation,
minutes we have.
in the few 20 minutes that we have. So we have a question from Mary Labowitz, again with GTA. She is talking specifically about like how can government organizations verify that an AI tool, for example, will continually support plain language and accessibility compliance. But I feel like it's a larger question for government and, for the tools that we seek. Now, to your point earlier, what you were talking about, where like, we have X amount of like identified AI tools. At some point, I think that's just going to be a given, right? So we probably will not have tools that are AI and tools that are non-AI. I mean, you just mentioned Grammarly. So that's probably like one of the most low-hanging fruit, low impact, low risk on, low risk AI tool, all the way up to maybe something that's like an autonomous decision-making tool. From a usage perspective, from an organization perspective, and even from like a procurement perspective, like how can we make sure that, like how can we basically keep these tools and keep some of the industry partners accountable, that they're indeed, serving what was in the agreement when we both signed.
Well, I think the one difficult part too is that we're not all experts in these areas. So I know for those of you that have been in procurement or that have dealt in making decisions about vendors, sometimes you're looking at this and you like understand this much of their product or even what we're using it for. And so it's such a challenge to even understand what we're making decisions about. We lean on each other. I think one area for that is expertise. So even when GDPR was first passed. So most people on the call probably know what that 4-letter acronym means, General Data Protection Regulation. GDPR, it's a European and EU law, but it has great impacts on us here in the United States as well. And hopefully, right, soon we'll most likely have our own US-based Data Privacy Act or protection or law in place as well. But at the time in 2018, when that was first launching, it was things like, well, your organization has to be GDPR compliant, and everybody's like, what is GDPR? We didn't even know what it was. And so some of it is scary, to Mary's point, in the sense of like, what do we need to be doing to make sure that the vendors are what they say they are and the products are doing what they say? The unfortunate truth is there's not an easy answer. It takes a lot of work, and we're already lacking resources. It's not like we can hire 15 more people in each of our offices to help us review contracts or to meet with these vendors and those types of things.
Right.
What we've done inside the University System of Georgia, as a state contractor, and this is probably similar for most of us on the calls, is that, you know, we don't sign contracts more than 1 year at a time. So even though we have RFPs and bids and they may have renewals on them, our contracts, at least for the USG, go from, you know, July 1st to June 30th each year. And we've kind of embedded a review process. It wasn't fun on the front end to build it out and to get it in place. It's aligned with our business procedures manual, 344, around supplier management. And Mary, to your point, how do you manage these relationships? And so we've kind of got a questionnaire on all of our vendors, which are a lot. You can imagine at the USG, we've got 26 institutions across the state. We have hundreds of thousands of vendors that we're working with, from individuals to organizations to agencies. And so we created, you know, basically a routing on that for vendors to check, hey, am I housing any PII for you, personally identifiable information, yes or no? If it's a yes, it starts to pathway a very different direction than if it's a no. And we've done a lot of routing on the back end to make sure that our legal, our data governance, our IT, our communications team, right, our institutional effectiveness teams, that it's routing based on what the vendor is saying that they have. Now, they cannot click stuff as well. So recently we had a vendor that's like, we haven't changed any of our products. And to your point, Nikhil, they had embedded artificial intelligence, kind of like Grammarly has now. You know, you can use Grammarly just to spell check and work on your paper, or you can use the other side of Grammarly now to completely create your paper. So it depends on which side of the house you're using for their product. And that it takes a lot of due diligence on our side. And I think where you're going to find for us as state organizations is negligence or not understanding things is not going to be a reason for not being held accountable. For us to say, well, I didn't know, or, you know, I didn't understand this product does this. We're going to have to be really careful, because we're going to be held accountable if that product or that feature or that technology, just as much as our vendor, right, or the client that we're working on. And you guys saw this in the recent CrowdStrike. So, you know, entities like Delta and companies that were using CrowdStrike were just as much at the forefront of that public incident as CrowdStrike itself, right? The company or the vendor that they were utilizing. And so it's going to take some intentional training, some thought process, some intentional questions. And we're kind of narrowing it down, and Nikhil knows in that space, we're going to have an intentional training for the state of Georgia for employees in procurement and purchasing. And it's going to have some of these big bucket questions. And if a vendor is not willing to answer that, this is just like cybersecurity. If one of our vendors is not willing to provide a SOC 2 report, or if they're not willing to provide us on their insurance policy, right, for data breaches and those things, we're probably not going to do business with them any longer. And I think that hurts in the sense that we've got some vendors that we like to do business with, and we want to continue that relationship. But we've got some real hard decisions in the sense that, unfortunately, the truth is, if that's not a space that your company is willing to come alongside, just like some of the ADA disability, right? WCAG 2.0, you know, level AA requirements for web pages and things like that. As state entities, we just don't have the flexibility to say, hey, you know, it's okay. You know, you guys work on that. We have to start holding our vendors accountable. But it's not an easy answer, Mary, and we're kind of just starting out in some of these conversations. Nikhil and I have discussed some things that have come, you know, even from just everyday life. We've got organizations that are now submitting, you know, putting delivery pods on our campuses, and like Uber Eats and, you know, different things. And those have a lot of complications and implications for us. And so it's going to be a lot of work, Mary. But our hope is, at least in the state of Georgia, through the Ethics DNA Guide, that hopefully we can provide some of that framework, some of the structures, and some of the really big questions that it's like, if you're missing this question, kind of like GDPR, if you are not protecting social security numbers, passport numbers, driver's license numbers, date of birth, you're probably in trouble.
Mhm.
Right. And so, yes, there's a whole lot of other personally identifiable information, but here are the big buckets. And that's what we're putting together around these new emerging technologies. Here's the big buckets. If you're addressing these, then you'll probably be okay. You won't be found negligent. You'll be found to be striving to do the best we can, and we'll be in a much better space.
Yeah, I'm gonna combine a couple questions and
Okay.
maybe weave that and make the most of the last 8 minutes. So
We can
let's
talk about this all day, you guys.
all day, and gosh, I mean,
I
like,
could.
we have lost track, right, in the past, like just talking about all these things. But
Yes.
so Les basically is asking if like an ethical person can be unintentionally ethical, right, in his or her AI usage, but also to the point of like, are there any examples of some of the organizations out there that actually have done a good job in being ethical? Because like, you look around and you just like social media, you read so much about like some of the whoopsies across companies, mostly like I've seen lately. Amazon has been in the news in the last few months for like, having their, I think, recognition with a K service where like their facial recognition was pretty heavily biased because maybe that's
Yeah.
that's the data that they train them upon, or like someone like a Clearview that just decided it's okay to just like literally just go online and just scrape billions of these images from social media without users' consent,
Mhm.
because it's another social facial recognition company. So we see a lot of these decisions within, organizations, and definitely these are people making them, but they need not always have a malicious intent. But after the fact, it just seems like, really? Like, what
Yeah.
really made you decide to do that? So, like, A, are there any glowing examples of someone who is absolutely following some good ethical standards? And B, how do we self-check before maybe, choosing to do one thing or the other?
Yeah, so I think it's really difficult, Les. We're all kind of in this emerging technology bucket together. We're seeing all the examples of what not to do in some of what Nikhil just mentioned from Amazon and even OpenAI, and I don't know if you guys have been reading up on Neuralink and some of the advancements that have been there at that organization, but we're starting to see little snippets, and even in other countries, right? So smart courts in China, and Nikhil and I have talked about how they've integrated artificial intelligence into federal sentencing in the court system within China. And that's scary, in the sense that imagine, being in the court system and now, being reviewed particularly by an artificial intelligence first. And if a judge wants to overthrow that, they have to actually appeal that and basically overcome the decision of the artificial intelligence in the smart court. And so that's a challenge. So I think what I can say is I don't know that I can point to one organization. You see really good practices that are starting to emerge. And so as I kind of gave that example of like a smart court, one of the things you really want to focus on when you're looking at organizations is not this flip, and this is one of the codes that we're working on, of having a decision process where it's like, instead of you're innocent or you're approved, and if you don't meet these things, now you're denied. A lot of the AI kind of decision-making models that are being integrated into organizations are much more, you're denied or it's a negative consequence unless you can prove, right? So instead of innocent until guilty, it's like now you're guilty until you're innocent. And that's a big flip. And so I think, one practice is to make sure that any organizations we're working with that are integrating artificial intelligence. So here's an example. When AI started to come out to be able to do pretty simple tasks, to organize, to be able to scan lots of information and correlate that information and bring forward to you, human resources, an area where they have to do that a lot, started to jump on that bandwagon. And you saw HR organizations start using that with hiring of candidates. So let's say you have an open position at your organization and you get 200 people that apply. Well, if you guys have ever been a hiring manager like me, that's a lot of work. to sit down and look through all 200 of those applications and review them. So they started to integrate artificial intelligence in to say they're going to look at all 200 of these and bring it to the top 10. And I, as the human, am only going to see the top 10. And you guys know where this story is going and the detriment that that started to have, the bias in the system and the unfortunate impacts of that. So we can point to a lot of things that we don't want to start doing. I think it's harder to point to an organization that's getting it all right or doing it right. I will give kudos to Georgia. I think Nikhil and his team are taking a very proactive approach. We've been working on the ethics project now for several months. And I think by spring of next year, we're going to have a pretty good foundation in place, irrelevant of what you're deciding or where you're at, of these key critical buckets within the ethics DNA to ask critical questions and to hopefully strengthen, because to your point, I think, Les, one of the top pieces of your question is, can ethical people end up finding themselves doing something wrong? And the answer is yes. We're seeing it constantly. Some of that is just from access. So if I'm a system administrator and now my system has more access, more data, more capability, more tools, my ability to use that system in different ways that maybe aren't approved for my usage is mainly some of what we're seeing, particularly in the IT space. And so we just have to be really careful. Nikhil, I know we've got a few minutes left. Do you want to give some parting thoughts? I will look through the questions in the Q&A, and Nikhil, I'll try to put some answers to that. I'll also give you some resources for your questions. Like I said, we've got several ethicists in the center. Dr. Catherine Baird at Ethics Game is an amazing resource if you're looking just to ask specific questions and is immersed in AI ethics right now. So
yeah, we unfortunately couldn't get to certain questions, but we will, thank you for offering that, Rose. We will definitely follow up with some answers to that, because we had some really interesting questions around the RFP process, addressing equity and ethics, and also actually environmental impacts. So,
yes.
That's a very different dimension.
That's a whole code in itself.
Yeah, exactly. We could have an entire conversation about that, but we are really lucky to have Rose working with us on the ethics DNA guide. And I think we'll definitely have you back, Rose, once we are done working on that guide, so we can talk about that. And that entire episode could be just focused on all the contents and all of these very specifics around what the guide constitutes. And like I said, we'll be rolling out some training that is going to be supporting in this particular effort. So,
and I'll say that'll be on different levels, right? We're all approaching this at different. There's executive decisions and leadership. There's procurement. There's IT, right? There's users. There's people that will implement the system. So the training will be at all different levels.
Yep. Really excited about that. I mean, it's been honestly, personally, we started off talking, I was aware, and I would say I thought I knew, but the more I dealt in the depths of this conversation and this particular topic, working with you, it is really just blown my mind of how important this is, specifically for the folks in technology who are at the decision-making level. So thank you again so much for joining us, Rose. This is,
welcome. Love to be in
always
here.
Great to feel oh my God, we ran out of time, and have the things I wanted to ask you, I couldn't even get to it. But also really want to thank all the participants who, took this time to join us. And stay tuned. We will be back, and I'm pasting our URL in the chat for any AI-related guidance that we have as GTA for other state organizations. It's a starting point, and at some point we'll be coming up specifically with the AI website that has a lot of guidelines and guidance added to that. So having said that, thank you again, and we will see everybody next month for the October GovChats. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. More to come.
More to come.